Hey DTS community, my name is John Dyer and I'm excited to get to talk to you a little bit about AI for the fall 2024 semester. So I hope this is good for the year, but as you know, things are changing really fast and this is just going to be a quick snapshot of things that have been happening for the last couple of years, things that are possible now, and then at the end of the video we'll talk about DTS specific policies and rules and that kind of thing. So we're going to start out with just a little outline of where we're going to go. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start out with talking about just AI, where has it been, where's it going. We'll talk about some really cool and fun uses, but also some dangerous things to be aware of, and just some reflections on where we're going and what does AI mean for us as people. And then at the end of the video, like I said, we'll talk about DTS's own policies and how we can, both as students and as faculty, stay in line with that for this fall. So first off, I just want to start out with a little bit of seminary, some Hebrew here. So if you're starting to do Hebrew, you know that this first verb means said, and then you see that the name of God here, Yahweh. Yahweh said to Joshua, "Don't fear and don't be dismayed." And then he goes on to tell Joshua, "Take with you all the people of war and arise and go attack." And if you remember the story, he says, go attack the city of Ai, or the city of Ai. Now, this is obviously the bad joke about AI in the scriptures. If you search for it, this is what you're going to find a couple of places in Joshua 8. But the thing I actually want to draw your attention to is not just the bad joke about AI, but just this part that Yahweh says, don't fear and don't be dismayed. I think there's always going to be challenges that we face as we come along to new cultural changes, technological changes. But there's a lot here that we have that could be positive for us that I think we can look at together. So what I want to do is just give us this kind of realism view of technology. There's a lot to be hopeful for, that God made us to make things, to use things, to create, to be creative like He is, and to make from what He's made. But we also got to be honest. Sometimes whenever we get more power, we don't have a lot of ability to handle that thing. And so we just need to balance these things, not be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, but be what I would call realistic, which is this balance of hopefulness and honesty. So here's where we are. Just about 2 years ago, a little less than that, the first version of ChatGPT came out, and that's really where a lot of AI hit the public consciousness. And pretty quickly, we updated DTS's initial policy to make sure we accounted for that under the plagiarism policy. And then, as you know, over the last year or two, there's just been a million AI products out there, things from Microsoft and from Facebook and Meta and Google, and all of them are releasing tools, lots of smaller tools from kind of niche companies, but just about everything now is AI powered, including pens and books and dishwashers and all that sort of thing. So we've updated our policy for the fall, and we'll go over that at the end. But just to give you a wide spectrum of where these things were, believe it or not, we've actually at DTS been talking about this for a while. In fact, back in 2016, we had an arts week where one of the subjects was technology, and it was specifically around art, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if we take an even longer look back, we'll see that there's been things going on since the 50s, when the Turing test was created and John McCarthy created this term artificial intelligence to describe what machines were able to do and what they saw machines being able to do in the future as they got faster and better. So there are things like anti-lock brakes, where there is a machine that's reacting to external stimuli and doing something better than a human can do, even if that's just pumping the brakes really fast. That's a kind of artificial intelligence. But really, in the popular consciousness, this starts becoming more apparent in the 90s when, most everybody has a computer. Things like the Terminator movie come out, or just before the internet is released. And then as the internet comes online, we start to see things like Deep Blue beating someone at chess. They're going, man, these machines aren't just able to lock our brakes. They're doing much more powerful things. Then, of course, Google Maps and Apple Siri, we're talking to our machines now. They're doing routes for us. And then somewhere in here, about 2014 is when we would say the first generative AI comes out. So if you've been hearing that term, I might divide AI into about 3 categories. So one of them is just this AI where it's just teaching it kind of if-then to react to stimuli. So your thermostat is doing this, where if temperature reaches a certain point, then it turns on or off your AC or your heater. And most of us here in Texas, our ACs are running all the time because it's always over the temperature we want. So that's more basic. The programmer is really in control of what's happening. Now, as we go on, there's this discriminative AI where instead of just looking at a number like a temperature, it's looking at all kinds of variables, so it's much more statistically oriented. And this would be things like, say, facial recognition in your camera. So it's able to focus on a person's face and light it for that. So it's able to do much more complicated data analysis to be able to figure out what things are. Still, again, that's looking at something and then determining something for it. The new thing was this generative AI, where all that stuff, all of that learning is then able to be pushed back out in a way that feels, looks, sounds a lot like human things. So when we were talking about this in 2016, the early generative systems really produced things that we might call more like art, because they were very abstract and they didn't look very photorealistic. So the question was, is it really art if a computer is generating it, or if a person is using a computer to generate it? Those were the kinds of questions you were asking in 2016. Well, by 2020, 2022, when ChatGPT came out and DALL-E and all these image generation systems, they started getting much better. And then very quickly, by 23, there was video. So this was a real famous video of Will Smith eating spaghetti that wasn't very good, but I think everyone could sense that this is going very fast from images to video. And now, just a month or so ago, we have this Flux AI came out, and this woman who's giving sort of a TED Talk looks incredibly realistic. And so it'd be much harder to find the flaws that we saw of multiple fingers early on. So this thing where it's creating something from scratch, there's no 3D artist here, it just looks like this. So right here at the end, her mouth looks a little bit off, but for the most part, you really wouldn't know that this was AI. So here's where we are. Generative AI can produce just about anything at a pretty good rate. And so there are all kinds of neat thoughts about maybe this would help us. I've been a coder for most of my life, and usually I look up an example and now I can just say, give me exactly what I'm looking for. And it gets it maybe 80, 90% there and really speeds up what I do. But there's also more of this analysis about being able to look into data and find patterns that maybe humans don't always see. And then the same kinds of patterns as looking at traffic patterns and saying, can we finally get something where a robot is able to drive in a consistently safer way than humans do? And so it seems like that's a harder problem than we thought it was going to be. And I, in that Arts Week from a couple of years ago, I really thought that self-driving cars would be here by now, because if you go back to that video, my kids are in it. And I thought by the time they turned 16, like they are right around now, that they wouldn't learn how to drive. So not everything has come as fast as we thought, but there's still great potential there. And then there's all kinds of other fields like custom medicine, custom being able to see what our clothes would look like. And then the area that we're most concerned with is education. So what I want to do is just turn to a couple of educational uses of AI. The first couple of uses I'm going to also include VR, just because that's so tied in together into how we might teach people in the future. So before we get into seminary, I want to start with something outside of seminary, which would be nursing education. So David Cotter up at Colorado Christian gave this example that I'm borrowing from him, which is that for a long time, doctors and nurses, they would train on one another, doing things like giving IVs or taking blood pressure, that sort of thing. But new robotic mannequins are able to do a lot more than your fellow student can do, and you can practice things. And the robot that you see up there on the top, it can scream, it can talk, it can secrete fluids. The female versions of them can give birth. All kinds of great tools that you can practice. Then, but there's also some who are experimenting with VR, which you see down there in the bottom, where they're able to walk through scenarios there. And they're comparing these to see what are the strengths and benefits of each model here. So some of the things they found is that, with the robotic team, one plus and minus is that it requires a larger team of people to work together. So multiple students need to be working on the robot at the same time. And it requires personnel in the back. But it does give a very physical, tactile experience, which is really positive. On the other hand, the VR one is something that is really neat in the sense that it's able to be very repeatable, and students are able to go through things really fast. So if they fail on something, they can just reset the entire simulation rather than have to go reset and put the fluids back in the robot mannequin. So sometimes students who are a little bit older, or students who are a little bit more worried about what their peers would think when they fail, they enjoy being able to go through lots and lots of scenarios and practice before they are able to do this in front of other people or in front of a real patient. So they both have pros and cons. The Colorado Christian University specifically noted that right now the VR modules don't have any sort of conversation that would be about someone's spiritual care, and so that's a downside for them. They can simulate more readily when it comes to a robotic environment. So lots of neat stuff going out there that's using a combination of AR and VR. I want to also show you that there are some great companies out there like VRBX that are doing incredible work to simulate what the ancient world of Israel would have looked like. And so here you can see the Temple of Herod is one of the places that they have set up for visitors to do. And the neat thing about this type of thing is that someone could, in some schools, they take 2 trips to Israel during their 4 years of college. but they're doing some testing to see if they do a VR trip and then an in-person trip, if that ends up being something that is just as educational and really orients someone ahead of time before they go. So that's also way less costly to do, and it allows people to explore things that maybe they couldn't even do over in Israel, like seeing the temple of Herod, or even the Temple of Solomon before that, to compare and contrast. So lots of neat stuff there. And if we keep moving on, I did a little demo a while back that was about how to use Bible translation, or at least teaching translation. And so in this particular video that I'll show you in just a second, I'm using a tool called HeyGen, and their tool allows me to just record a video in English like I'm doing now, but then I can put it through their system, and they'll take my voice imprint, they'll translate it to a different language, and then make it sound like it's coming from my voice, and then even regenerate my lips. So let's watch this. This is Matthew 28:18 and 19. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you." Okay, let's see how it does.
Mateo 20:818 y 19. Jesús se acercó y dijo: Se me ha dado toda autoridad en el cielo y en la tierra. Ve y haz discípulos de todas las naciones. Bautízalos en el nombre del Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo, y enséñales a obedecer mis mandamientos. 马修28:18和19，耶稣来到他们那里，说：天上地下所有的权柄都已经赐给了我。什么民做门徒，依附自圣灵的名实习，并教导他们遵守我所吩咐的一切。让我们看看他的表现如何。मैथ्यू 20:8-18 और 19 है। तब यीशु उनके पास आया और कहा, स्वर्ग और पृथ्वी में सभी अधिकार मुझे प्राप्त हो गए हैं। जाओ और सभी देशों के छात्र बनो, पिता, पुत्र और पवित्र आत्मा के नाम में स्नान करा के आपको आज्ञा दी है, उसे मानने का सिखाते हैं। चलो, ये कैसे होता है?
So that's a pretty incredible technology there that is able to make it so that I can communicate with all kinds of people. And most of the speakers of these languages, Spanish, Chinese, and Hindi, that I've spoken to, said it did pretty well. Every once in a while it might mix up a number or something like that, but for the most part it does a really good job. And this is a technology that's getting better all the time. So there's lots of neat things out there for just teaching translation. There's also specifically in the area of Bible translation, Wycliffe and others are doing great work to take all the existing tools that are out there to do translation, and as a lexicon is built, to be able to then begin creating a translation a lot faster. So what they're finding is some things where by starting with an AI translation and then editing it, that even team dynamics change a little bit, particularly in different types of cultures where there might always be a deferment to someone who's older. Now they're able to really balance out what the language means in a much better way. And then, the New Testament and Old Testament are both faster, such that the whole Bible can be done in the kind of time that it used to take to do a New Testament. So this isn't entirely AI driven. It's just AI sped up, and then it's human curated at the end. And they're seeing we're able to eliminate Bible poverty in a much faster way. So another video here that I just want to show you is, as DTS is looking at its historic centennial, we've been taking some things of saying, how could we simulate a video from Louis Sperry Chafer, the founder of Dallas Theological Seminary. So here is Professor Reg Grant, who has recently retired, and we took him and put him in a studio, then took this picture of Chafer and put it over his face, and we're able to generate some video from that. And so it's a pretty incredible looking thing that is able to make it look pretty close to him. Now, the catch on this particular one is that he would need to shave his beard for it to look most accurate, but it's doing a pretty good job. And so you can see here 2 different tools, Anyone Swap and A-Cool, both of which are about $1 a minute. And so very affordable stuff that's getting better all the time. This is the kind of thing that was in Star Wars a couple years ago to kind of recreate Princess Leia and Luke, and now it's something that you can use just in your backyard. At the same time, though, this is very, very scary, because if anyone's face can be put on anyone else's face, you can think of all kinds of terrible things that could be done with it as well. So I want to talk about some more specific things that a teacher could do if you are a teacher, or if you're a teacher here at DTS, or if you are in some type of ministry situation. You could just go into something like ChatGPT and outline a new Bible study. So here you could say how many weeks you want it to be. You could type in, what the audience is, what you want it to do. So I put together one of these just to show you as a little sample here. I did Galatians for college students. And if I ask it to output something, it does a pretty good job of outlining the book. Now, I've done this a couple of times, and every once in a while it leaves off the last maybe 10 or 15 verses. It would say end, if I said do Colossians, it would end at Colossians chapter 4, verse 5, and leave off the rest of the book. But for the most part, it does a great outline, has some great chapter titles, pretty good questions. And here, because I've asked it to give a snack, it's pretty funny, the types of things that it comes up with. So this can be a good little starting point for you if you're trying to find something. At the same time, if you are going to seminary to be the kind of person who can't do this on your own, this may be a skill that you want to develop internally and not always rely on a machine. I also, in my own Trinitarian class, I've got a little section on Mary, and for some hybrid classes, I actually need to record the video like I'm doing now. But instead of just asking the students, did you watch the video, I actually want to give them a short quiz. Not so much that I want to grade that, but I just want to say, hey, here's the most important points. So I could go and upload these into something like ChatGPT and say, make a quiz on this, and then it will generate and come up with 5 or 6 questions that are pretty good, seeing which of the titles refers to Mother of God here, which one is really, which particular belief is this that has to do with Mary's conception. These are not bad questions. Now, I might edit them a little bit, but then I can go in and also say, can you convert this into a format for Canvas, which is what we use for our learning management system? And it will then produce that same file so that I can download it. So lots of great tools just to sort of accelerate and help your students learn. Even though I'm the one creating the content to begin with, I'm adding on to that with the tools. And so there's other tools like this where this is Blueprint is a tool used by licensed therapists to be able to record the session they have with a client. And the point of this is not just to record it, but to actually summarize it and create some notes. So when a therapist is normally making their own notes, in this case, they're able to think a little bit more about how they might respond and listen to their client and not think so much about the note-taking. So this can be a really helpful thing for some people. Now, other therapists might say the actual note-taking is part of my process and don't want to cede that over to a machine. But for many people, this can be a helpful add-on to them, as long as it is, of course, disclosed and that the client has given approval for that. So there's some of those ethical concerns in there that if someone was to do this without disclosing to a client, that would be both unethical but also probably illegal for their practice. For pastors, there's also a variety of tools. There are certainly some things in systems like Logos that help you generate a sermon outline and help you think about a way to deliver it. But Pulpit.ai doesn't do any of those things. As you can see, what its little tagline here is everything for after you preach. So if you preach a sermon and you've been recorded, then you can upload that recording, and what it will do is create kind of clips that it thinks are the best that you could use on social media to point people to that sermon or to advertise your church to an audience. It will also create discussion questions for your church members in their small groups. So it's able to just take what you've done and do something with it. So you're still in charge of things. You're just able to do more things with it. And of course, there are also new good voice systems where ChatGPT 4.0 now has the ability to speak back and forth to it. So you could say, take on the scenario of, say a person who's in an abusive relationship that comes to your church and is asking for help. Then it will start talking to you as if it were that person. And then you can simulate, what would that be like? What are the types of responses you would want to be able to give in that situation? And to be able to learn from that so that when you're faced with a real person in that situation, you might have practiced it once or twice, which is similar to what we were seeing with the nurses at the beginning. So there's all kinds of great stuff out there with AI that you can use for education. We're seeing, everything from maps to the way that we write to the things that we speak with, all kinds of neat uses that we've been doing for a long time of AI more broadly. Of course, with any technology, there are also some really negative usages. There are things that are trying to, pull people in to just spend more time on their devices so that ads can be shown. There are the kind of filter bubble concepts where everyone is consuming all kinds of media and we all think that we are consuming the right and true thing. But in a sense, each of the systems are just sending us algorithmically what they know will keep us on for longer. And then we're being surveilled in more direct ways as well. So there are these kinds of negative things that are happening at the same time. So that's where I want to move into some what I would call warnings and reflections, because what I want to do is move beyond this good and bad usage to be thinking about how does using it for good or for bad form us in particular ways. So you've probably heard some of the generative AI concerns, things like that because AI is looking at a lot of material and trying to predict what would make the most sense, it doesn't always do things right. Sometimes the sort of guesses that it produces can end up creating errors. There's some really funny errors out there that have happened over the last year or two. Those are getting better though. So I think that's less and less of a concern as we go, as the systems get better, but it's always a risk in the background. Related to this is not so much just errors, but the kind of biases that are built in. So when a machine reads all of human civilization, it gains the kinds of biases that we have. So we tend to think of doctor and nurse as being male and female, even though that's not really built into those jobs. We tend to associate those, and that shows up in our language, and AIs learn that from us. But also, when we try to correct for that, sometimes it overcorrects. So you probably heard stories about image generation tools that, we're sort of taught to be very, very diverse. So even when you say, type in an African person or an Irish person, it shows one of each in the bank of photos and doesn't really represent what you're asking for in its attempt to not be biased. It ends up being biased in different directions. Again, I think these are more short-term issues. But in the long-term issues, we do have to deal with, where did this material come from in the first place? Who really has ownership of it? And also just the power that it's consuming. So right now, we think that AI and generative AI in general is consuming a pretty big chunk. 4% is not nothing, and that's going to continue to rise over the coming decades. So all this power is being generated, not for sort of people to eat, breathe, live, sleep, and be human, but for AI things. So those are some of the kind of more pressing concerns. But the longer term ones would be, how do we think about ourselves? So one question would be this idea of, can AI show empathy? Is it really doing anything underneath the hood? And I'm not sure exactly how to answer this, but I want to show you one way to do it. So I've got to know the guys that make BibleChat.ai, and these group of people decided, we're going to teach an AI all things Bible and theology so that people can download this app and they can ask questions about prayer and forgiveness and what are the 5 points of Calvinism and all kinds of really deep theological and philosophical questions. That's what they thought would happen. And it does to some extent. People like to ask questions about those things to the chatbot and interact in that way. But what they found, and they shared some transcripts about this, is that sometimes when a person is asking a question like about forgiveness, the longer they spend on the AI system, they begin to ask more personal and more intimate questions. So in this case, this person isn't just asking about forgiveness in general. She's asking about her husband who's committed adultery. Can I, or should I, or do I have an obligation to forgive him? How do I even do that? She says, what steps can I take? What if he's not repentant or remorseful? And she goes on to ask questions about, what she needs to do with her husband, and is he one with that woman? So very deep and personal questions, really about his identity and her identity. These are not just abstract theological questions; these are deep and personal questions. So I think what I would say about this question about can AI have empathy is, probably not in a real sense. There really is no person behind that is really showing empathy. And yet, in our current busy, always on, everyone's on their phones, everyone's busy type of culture, that people aren't very good at listening, and most people don't give you that second look. Most people don't ask that second question, and most of us, when we have something that we feel ashamed about, we're not ready to just go out there and ask somebody because we don't know what someone's going to think. But when we know that an AI is never going to judge us, is never going to turn away, is never going to get distracted, and is always going to be there to answer questions, it feels a lot more like AI than what most people experience in a given day. So as we're training in seminary to be the kind of people who can listen, not just who have answers, but who are able to be there when it hurts, this is important for us to realize. Our people will be turning to these types of machines, and we want to give them an alternative path. And this will probably become only more apparent when we move from chat to sort of more embodied forms of AI that are performing physical tasks, perhaps for older people or for kids, and that eventually those biases will be reflected in those machines as well. And so this is kind of the direction that we're going. So again, we want to have this idea that we want to be realistic about it, and we want to be, excited about the things that God's given us. And yet, as we're being realistic about ourselves, there is a certain kind of pessimism we need to have about the more power that we get, our ability to handle that seems to go way down. So when we look at the last, couple hundred years, there's been some amazing things that technology has done. You can see here is that poverty has gone way down and that illiteracy has gone way down. So in other words, people have more enough money to buy food now, and more people know how to read and write. And those are good things that we should celebrate. The last 200 years of technological progress has brought us a lot. The problem is that when we get over a certain threshold, it seems as though we're not able to handle it as a society or as individuals. So if for a long time people were just trying to get enough food to survive, once they have too much food, and you'd see in the US that this obesity rate is going off the charts, that people are now struggling to regulate because instead of just trying to get food, now they're trying to not have too much food, and we're not able to do that at a very good rate. Similarly, although a little bit more tenuous of a connection, when we think about something like illiteracy, it seems as though access to information was the big problem for most of human civilization. Well, now we have too much access to information. You're seeing these things like the teen suicide rate going up right about around the time when things like smartphones become more ubiquitous. Now, I don't mean to say that this rise that you see around 2007, 2008 is 100% the result of smartphones. And this varies a little bit by culture and region of the country and all that stuff. But it's hard not to at least correlate this in some way, that having constant access to information and notifications is something that we're just not ready to handle very well. And so what I would say is that when we are paying attention to this type of thing, we want to be aware of the good and bad uses of a technology. So with a shovel, you could use it for good or you could use it for bad. But we want to be even more careful to always be looking at what are some of the formational things that happen, whether we use it for good or for bad. How are we transformed in the using of it? So when you're using a shovel, it really doesn't matter if you're doing a morally good end or a morally bad end. You're still going to get blisters that are turned into calluses, and eventually your muscles will change, your knowledge of the soil will change. And these don't really have any relevance to whether or not you're doing morally good ends or morally bad ends. You still get formed. So when we think about a variety of machines over kind of human existence, things like even washing machines and dishwashers that were invented in the 40s and 50s, most people thought that everyone would have these trouble-free lives, that we would save time and that we wouldn't have to do any of this work anymore, that machines would make everything so easy. Well, it turned out that the underlying message that was behind all of that was that now that you have this device that can clean a house, now you can have a bigger house. Now that you have a machine that can clean your clothes, you should get more clothes, or you should get cheaper, more disposable clothes. So sometimes what a technology is supposed to do ends up creating a different output in the rest of society. The internet itself was thought to be the place where we would all get tons of information, that we would have access to things that we never could find, and we wouldn't have to buy encyclopedias and books like you see behind me. We could just get right at it with the internet. Well, it turned out that by doing that online, we all started to believe that anything that could be done, anything important, anything useful, can be done online. And so now we do all kinds of things. We do all of our shopping, but we also do a lot of our relating online. And what we're seeing is that transfer of some things online, like buying airplane tickets, is great. But other times when we put too many things online, we as a society are getting incredibly lonely. And kids are spending less time with other kids. You're seeing fewer and fewer people eating meals even together, even at work or even among their family. And so we're seeing loneliness skyrocket and all kinds of problems happening, that there's this technology that does something, but as we use it, even if we're using the internet for only good moral ends, it seems like it shapes something about us. And so when we come to generative AI, I think the thing that's happening is that it's teaching us underneath the hood that we can get results, we can get outputs without the process of ourselves developing that skill or becoming something, or the kinds of effort that it might have taken. So it might have taken you, maybe an hour or two to figure out how to outline the book of Galatians. Well, when a machine does it like that, we sometimes don't become the kind of person who can outline the book of Galatians. So you get results without becoming. Now, sometimes, again, this is going to be a good thing for us to get results, like, say, when you take your sermon and you have it output some questions, and that saves you a little bit of time, because you're doing that basic thing at the beginning. But where we put that tool and at what point do we seed over that skill, that's going to become the real big question for us, because this underlying thing that we want to know is, do you want to become the kind of person that can look up the length of a marathon, or do you want to become a marathon runner? And becoming a marathon runner requires effort and requires a certain kind of becoming to turn into that person, not just to get access to the information. So that's my overview of just where AI has been going. Now what I'd like to do is talk specifically about DTS's policy, and then address students and then faculty together. So here's our just some research about where our students currently are, though, just to make sure we're kind of framing this up. Our IRIE and EDD department surveyed a couple of students and asked them, a group, and said, hey, do you use AI in your studies? And 10 of them said yes, they do, and 12 of them didn't answer. So this is an indication that a good chunk of students out there are using AI in some way in their ministry work or in their studies. And so we want to talk about where DTS's rules are and kind of make sure you know which ones are good for you and faculty, which ones are good for your students. What do you use it for? Of course, some are doing, the initial research to find things. Some of them are using it in the process of writing itself. But all the students that are in this, at least half of them are saying, we probably need some more clarity, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this particular video. So here was DTS's original policy on plagiarism. It's really focused on the concept of theft, of taking someone else's work and describing it as your own work without citing that person. That's the primary problem with plagiarism, is presenting someone else's work as your own work without citing that. Of course, part of research is using other people's work, and you make an argument and then you support it by looking at other people's research and saying, hey, this person said this and this person said this and this person said this, and you interact with it. That's great. But this idea of taking someone else's work as your own really works well with generative AI. So we added a little statement here at the bottom of saying, in addition to taking someone else's work, if you use text written by a generation system, that is something that you can't do as well. Well, the problem with this particular statement is it doesn't really allow for any type of usage. And so for fall 2024, what we've done is add this little extra clause that says, without a professor's permission or direction, and without citation. So I want to note really quickly here, and we'll cover this a couple times, but you have to have a professor's permission in order to use any form of generative AI. So if you use generative AI without your professor's permission, you're violating DTS's policy. The second part is that you need to be doing citation, and if you were to go to our library's website, look at research methods, here there's the Turabian form up here, and that's going to pull down a lot of specific things like how do you cite a book without page numbers. This would be, here this is an example of how do you cite things in something like Logos, where you don't have a physical book with page numbers. And if you scroll a little bit further down, it's going to say how do you cite something that you generated with AI. And notice here you need to mention the software here, GPT is ChatGPT 4.0, when you accessed it and what the prompt was. Those are the key factors that you need to have in your note, and then your bibliography, a link to that system. Now, to summarize this, though, there are a couple of different types of AI tools. We just talked about generation, so I just want to make sure we make it real clear what you should and shouldn't be using as students and faculty, what you can be allowing and talking to your students about. So, of course, there's a kind of AI that's the old school, just checking your grammar, checking your sentence syntax. Word does this, Apple Pages does, things like Grammarly do sometimes even better job of this. So yes, keep using all those things for that basic spell check and grammar check. But there are also newer tools in things like Grammarly and in Microsoft Copilot that will do a bit of rewriting. So you can see the sentence here is not written very well. If I were to put this into a rewriting system, it could rewrite it for me. Now, the reason why I've got this as a yellow check mark instead of a red one, instead of a green one, is that this is the kind of thing where you may want to actually develop this skill because you're in the seminary, and the reason why you're here is you want to talk to real people, which is what this sentence is trying to do. And you may want to develop that skill and not have to be reliant on a machine. And so we've actually opened up a new writing center here at DTS that's based in the Dallas campus, but you can access it from anywhere. If you're an online student or you're at one of our extension sites or campuses, you can access this and join a meeting with them. And what will happen is that in this case, instead of just having AI rewrite it for you, which you can do, you can actually talk with a human being and say, hey, why is this unclear? Can you help me understand how to structure this? Because you actually want to become the kind of person who can communicate clearly. And by working with the writing center, I think you'll be able to develop that skill. This is similar to the area of research. So AI is getting pretty good at, if you're saying, I need to find some sources that support this key argument, it can go out there and find that. Or if you were to go to the library and you find several books or PDFs or ebooks, you could put that into an AI system and say, hey, could you summarize this for me and help me before I realize whether or not I should or shouldn't actually spend the time to read this paper. That's good. That's something that you can do. Again, you should note that sometimes it will produce things that maybe aren't there. So just be careful that you are really paying attention to the citations and looking them up for yourself. Those will get better, of course, over time, but you just want to be aware of that. This is also where the library staff here in Dallas can help you. They can scan things for you. They can point you to resources. So you've got some human things here on the right in italics that are things that you can access and talk to and develop that skill on your own. Now, the last one is the one where you've got the red X here, where again, the generative systems where you were to say, I'm not writing it myself and then having AI help me a little bit with that. I'm actually just starting with a prompt and having AI generate something. That's something that as a student, we are asking you not to do. And that's something that you can do if a professor assigns it to you, or if you ask that professor and say, may I use this? as long as I cite it, then you can do that. But please, please, please make sure you ask your professor first, or look for that actually being an assignment. So let me give you an example of an assignment where this would actually be allowed because it's built into the assignment. So one of the classes I teach is ST 5102, our Trinitarian class, and early in the semester I have students read something, and we do some initial work on the doctrine of the Trinity. I say, okay, what I want you to do is to look at two examples, one from your own church's website and one from another church's website. And I just want you to evaluate that on a couple of different questions. So this is just to get our students thinking about different doctrinal statements. So when they write their own, at the end of the semester, they have something that they begin thinking about. Now, what I've added this semester is a little clause here saying that they have their own churches and another churches, or they can generate one with AI and critique that statement. Now, when it comes to their final paper where they turn in a doctrinal statement, they're not to use generative AI for that. This is their own formulation of the doctrine. But here, they're able to use it here. Notice again, there are the two criteria here. One, I'm giving them directive and permission to do it. And two, I'm showing them how to cite it in the assignment notes. So this is what's required for you. So students, here's just a little quick summary of where you are going to be. First off, you need to ask your prof for any use of generative AI. So if you're going to use that for any sense, translation, outlining, anything, you need to make sure you ask your prof first. Otherwise, that prof may give you a 0 on that assignment. And then just to remind yourself again, your goal of coming to seminary is not to get grades, not to pass assignments or classes. Your goal is to become something. And that may vary based on your degree or the calling that you feel like God has in your life. But your goal is to go through a process of spiritual and intellectual formation. And so just don't shortchange that. You'd rather get a C and have learned something than have a machine give you an A and you don't become anything different. And so this is the thing. There's lots of ways out there for you to be able to get help from actual human beings. Your profs, your GTAs, the writing center, the library, all of those are there for you to learn how to dialogue with people, because you're here to impact the world and to see people who need to come to Christ. So if you want to get good at talking with people, we want to have you talk with people as well. So at the same time, when it's appropriate, I want you to use it and to learn from it and have a great time with it. So for professors at the same time, we're asking you to make sure you're addressing this in your classes. Pretty upfront, talk about the papers. If you've got a place where you want students to use generative AI, do. Or if you have a place where you feel like it would be very easy to use AI and you want to emphasize not to do that, then go ahead and do that. And then there may be times where you need to actually reformat an assignment or think about the kinds of assignments that don't lend themselves to just putting in the prompt and immediately generating something. There are certain kinds of things that you do, like applying special principles to something, making it be very personal and situational, turning in a draft and then turning in a final, and maybe even having track changes in a document so you can see the progress of that. Those are all different ways that you can design your assignments. They're never going to be AI proof, but they may be the types of assignments that just don't lend themselves toward generative AI as much. Now, there are some detection software platforms out there. There's things like CopyLeaks and GPT-0, SEO.ai, our own Turnitin system. All of those can do some level of detection, but they're not particularly reliable. And so you may get a lot of false positives or false negatives. So they're not really foolproof. So this is where profs, I would just say, use your gut. If you see something that just doesn't seem quite right, the best thing for you to do is just to ask your student about it. So for students and faculty, here's kind of what's going to be the process. This is the same process we've had for plagiarism for a long time. If a faculty member, just sort of suspects and goes, this just doesn't look right, or maybe something in Turnitin and Canvas, it's a higher percentage than you would think. You start looking at that and you go, something's going on here. The first thing you're going to do is just contact the student and ask them and just say, hey, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to say something looks different here. Can you tell me about that process? And both students and faculty, you can generally kind of tell if someone starts backpedaling pretty quickly or is a little bit evasive, and you have to ask directly. So you're just going to need to do that. Students, my recommendation to you is just to be direct. If this is something that you've done, just admit it pretty quickly. And then faculty members, if the student says, hey, this is what I did, then really you have the discretion to go all the way to 0 if someone is using a generative system anywhere in their assignment. You can give them 0 for a portion of it that they used it for, or for the full assignment. And the thing that we're asking you to do is to report that to the dean of students so that they can have a deeper conversation. Because most of the time when someone is doing some form of plagiarism, there's something else going on in their life. It's not that they're bad people who are cheating, it's just that sometimes you get behind, and that getting behind is something else going on in your life. And we want to care for you students. We don't just want to give you a 0. We really want to make sure that we are restoring you to your full academic potential and ministerial potential in the future. So if it's still a little bit conclusive, it may still be a good time just to talk with Dr. Baxter. But the good thing is that this isn't just a punitive thing, that one of the things you can do is say, if you're struggling in this area, again, faculty and students, we want to direct you to the New Writing Center because, again, we want to turn you into the kind of person that can write, not just the kind of person that can use a tool to write for them. So what my hope is that in all of this, again, you have this kind of realism. You realize, man, God has given us these incredible tools and incredible abilities, our mind, our heart, our soul, but also our strength and the things that we make. But also we just got to be honest about our own temptations and what's coming along. So I hope this is helpful for you. And please feel free to reach out to me. My name is John Dyer again, and I'd be happy to talk about this or anything else if you want to.